On the evening of August 6th, a quiet Texas town became the center of a chilling mystery. A rented minivan was seen driving along an empty road, the driver moving with a strange sense of purpose. Hours later, something horrifying was found in a muddy ditch nearby, something that would change everything. What really happened that night? Who was responsible, and why? As the pieces started to come together, a heartbreaking story unfolded, leaving a family in ruins and a community searching for answers. Melissa Banda was born on February 8, 1983, to parents Fidel Banda and Graciela Ortega. Known for her energetic personality and radiant smile, Melissa was the second oldest in a family of 6 siblings. She had 4 sisters and one brother named Fidel Jr. The family settled in McAllen, a Texan city just 20 miles away from their hometown and near the Mexican border. McAllen's rich Hispanic culture meant many residents, including Melissa's family, were fluent in Spanish. Despite limited information about her early years, her father fondly remembered her as a diligent student who excelled in school and was always eager to share her grades with pride. After graduating high school, Melissa expressed her dream of pursuing higher education in San Antonio, Texas. Upon returning to McAllen, Melissa met Richard Ford, a man 4 years her senior and also a local. Richard's past was troubled. He had been convicted of attempted homicide in 2002 and served 8 years in prison before being released on parole. Despite his dark history, Melissa fell in love with him. The couple married in 2008, starting their life together. Melissa worked at T-Mobile, climbing the ranks to become a district operations manager. Richard, on the other hand, worked as a welder in the Rio Grande Valley, though he often told Melissa's family that he was employed in Alaska. The couple had 3 children together. Elizabeth, their eldest, born around the time of their marriage, Kimberly, 2 years later, and their son, Richard Jr. By all accounts, Melissa was a devoted mother, actively involved in her children's lives. She even coached her daughter's soccer team. However, while her children brought her immense joy, her marriage to Richard became a source of deep pain. Over time, Richard revealed himself to be controlling and abusive, subjecting Melissa to both physical and verbal torment. After years of suffering, she decided to end the marriage. On November 7, 2019, she formally filed for divorce and obtained a temporary restraining order to protect herself from potential retaliation. Her fears were justified. 2 weeks later, on November 21st, Melissa called the McAllen police, terrified because Richard was heading to her home after receiving the divorce papers. He had been calling her incessantly, using a voice-altering device to disguise his identity. Despite his attempts at anonymity, Melissa was certain the threatening calls were from him. He repeatedly reminded her that they were still legally married and threatened to kill her if she didn't abandon the divorce. When Melissa finally confided in her father, Fidel, he was shocked. He hadn't known the extent of her suffering, as Richard's supposed job in Alaska meant he was rarely around. Fidel began accompanying Melissa to places like the gym, waiting in the parking lot to ensure her safety while she exercised. The harassment reached its peak on February 28, 2020. That day, Melissa had planned to meet one of her sisters for lunch. When Melissa didn't show up, A rarity for someone as punctual as she was, her sister became worried. She sent messages and tried calling her sister but received no response. Alarmed, she rushed to Melissa's home. Upon arriving, she found the garage door open. Inside was Richard, pacing nervously. Melissa's dog was outside, an unusual sight. As soon as Richard saw Melissa's sister, he quickly got into his silver truck. He demanded that she move her car, which was blocking his exit. Reluctantly, she complied, and Richard sped away. Entering the garage, Melissa's sister made a horrifying discovery. Melissa was curled into a fetal position behind a shelf. Her fear was palpable. She trembled visibly when her sister asked what had happened. Melissa recounted that she and Richard had argued about financial matters related to their divorce. The confrontation escalated when Richard suddenly grabbed her hair, slammed her against a wall, and immobilized her. With one hand covering her mouth and nose and the other pressing against her neck, he cut off her air. She feared for her life, but the most chilling part was his threat to harm her children if she reported the assault. Alarmed by Melissa's account, her sister urged her to contact the police. Though initially paralyzed by fear, Melissa finally agreed. Officers arrived at her home soon after, documenting her injuries with photographs. Richard was arrested later that day while at an amusement park with their children. During the interrogation, Richard offered a different version of events. He described Melissa as paranoid and hysterical, denying any intent to harm her. According to him, she had overreacted during their argument, throwing herself to the ground and screaming. Richard claimed he held her against the wall only to calm her down and even brought her water afterward. Despite his calm demeanor, his interrogator noticed signs of agitation. Richard was charged with third-degree assault for impeding her breathing, but was inexplicably released after 24 hours in custody. In the aftermath, Melissa temporarily moved with her children to Richard's mother's house before settling with her sister Cynthia in McAllen. To protect her, Cynthia and their father, Fidel, installed security cameras throughout the residence. Despite these measures, Richard's harassment continued. On March 11, 2020, during a divorce hearing, he was granted supervised visits with the children and ordered to attend anger management classes. Later that month, Melissa obtained another restraining order against him. By April 7, 2020, their divorce was finalized, but Richard was far from ready to let go. He filed a motion to contest the court's decision and intensified his campaign of intimidation. Between June and August 2020, Melissa filed multiple reports against Richard. On June 9th, she accused him of stalking her at the gym. On June 30th, she reported that he had violated the restraining order again. On July 7th, Melissa discovered that Richard had posted her photo and phone number on a website for adult services, leading to a flood of inappropriate messages. The next day, she suspected he had placed a tracking device on her car. On July 18th, she reported another violation of the restraining order, and on July 20th, she informed police that Richard had stolen her identity online. By August 5th, a day before a court hearing related to the divorce, she alleged that Richard had stolen a vehicle from her property. Despite the constant harassment, Melissa's family remained her source of strength. Cynthia, in particular, often reminded her sister to stay vigilant. "If you ever see him, take off your heels and run," Cynthia told her. Melissa managed to laugh, promising she would. But the nightmare reached its peak on August 6, 2020. That day, after a court hearing, Melissa called her eldest daughter, Elizabeth, who was staying with a friend. She told her she missed her and then headed to her sister's house. At 3:45 p.m., she arrived at the driveway but never made it inside. Inside the house, the nanny, Yulisa, heard loud screams coming from the garage. Alarmed, she checked the security cameras and saw a white van speeding away. Rushing outside, she found Melissa's car parked with the driver's door open. Her belongings, including her high heels, were scattered on the ground. Panicked, Yulisa called 911 and reviewed the security footage with Cynthia's eldest son. The footage revealed a terrifying scene. Richard had aggressively grabbed Melissa, covering her mouth as she screamed and struggled. Her shoes fell off as he forced her into the white Dodge minivan parked nearby. The vehicle sped away with Melissa inside. The family was devastated when Cynthia's son recognized Richard as the abductor. A formal report of Melissa's abduction was filed with the McAllen Police Department. On August 6th, as evening began to set in, the case of Melissa's disappearance took a dramatic turn. Family members, including her brother Fidel Jr., had been tirelessly searching for her, combing through ditches, canals, and even landfills. The authorities were scrutinizing a man in a surveillance video who bore a striking resemblance to Richard Ford, Melissa's estranged husband, known for a history of domestic violence. Efforts to locate him initially failed, which only raised suspicions further. Investigators then shifted their focus to finding Richard, believing he could be connected to Melissa's disappearance. That same evening, a park ranger noticed a suspicious white minivan about 150 miles from McAllen, Texas. When he approached the driver, the man identified himself as Sergio Sanchez. A routine check of the license plate revealed that the vehicle was flagged by authorities. Another officer arrived, and upon further inspection, they found the man's true identity, Richard Ford. He was immediately taken into custody. The minivan's GPS data revealed it had been rented at McAllen International Airport. By retracing its movements, authorities uncovered a disturbing trail. On August 6th, the vehicle had stopped at Melissa's residence, a market, and a rural area just 15 miles from McAllen. Surveillance footage from the airport confirmed Richard's presence. He was seen wearing a baseball cap, blue shirt, jeans, and sandals. Investigators then focused on the rural area, as GPS data indicated a specific drainage ditch. The site was muddy from recent rain, and as they dug through the area, they uncovered horrifying evidence. First, they found a pair of jeans and strands of human hair, then the partially buried body of a woman. She was lying face down, and when they turned the body over, they discovered a gruesome wound across her neck, described as stretching from ear to ear. Nearby, investigators found a relatively new water bottle and a surgical mask. The victim was later identified as Melissa. Preliminary autopsy results revealed a deep incision which had severed the esophagus, neck arteries, and even reached the vertebrae. Additional injuries were found on her wrists, possibly caused by pellets or sharp objects. The forensic pathologist determined the fatal wound was inflicted shortly after her abduction. With the case now officially classified as a homicide, evidence from the rented minivan further implicated Richard. Small, microscopic red stains were found on the rear panel and wheel well. DNA analysis confirmed the genetic material matched Melissa. Additionally, investigators uncovered receipts showing that Richard had recently purchased hunting knives, zip ties, duct tape, and an air pistol with copper-coated pellets. These purchases pointed to a premeditated plan. On August 8, 2020, Richard Ford was formally charged with capital murder during the commission of an aggravated kidnapping. Other charges included assaulting a family member by impeding their breathing, violating a protective order, and harassment. He was held without bond, with bail set at $4.5 million. The evidence against Richard continued to mount. Days after his arrest, authorities searched his silver truck parked at McAllen International Airport. Inside, they found more copper-coated pellets, carbon dioxide cartridges for the air pistol, and a large blue canvas bag. They also discovered a keychain with a gym membership card linked to the same franchise Melissa frequented. Richard now faces trial for a crime that shocked the community and devastated Melissa's family. His actions left a trail of evidence too significant to ignore, and he remains the primary suspect in her tragic death. On March 3, 2021, Richard Ford entered a plea of not guilty to all charges, despite the overwhelming evidence suggesting premeditation in the murder of Melissa, the mother of his 3 children. According to the investigators, Richard meticulously planned the crime, even going as far as disposing of Melissa's body. Months later, on November 8, 2021, the prosecution announced they would not seek the death penalty against Richard, opting instead for life imprisonment. This decision came despite the gravity of the charges, which included capital murder during an aggravated kidnapping. Nearly a year later, on August 5, 2022, Melissa's sister filed a federal lawsuit against the city of McAllen and its police department on behalf of Melissa's estate. The lawsuit alleged that Melissa had contacted the police 9 times before the attack, seeking protection from her ex-husband's harassment, and that authorities failed to act despite knowing about Richard's violent criminal history. Unbeknownst to Melissa, Richard had a prior conviction for attempted murder in 2002 and an assault charge. The lawsuit claimed the police's inaction reflected a discriminatory pattern of neglect toward domestic violence cases involving Hispanic women. The estate sought a jury trial and compensation for Melissa's emotional distress, medical and funeral expenses, and the mental anguish she endured before her death. The city of McAllen denied all allegations. Meanwhile, Richard's trial drew closer. Jury selection began on February 23, 2024, with the trial itself commencing 5 days later, on February 27th. The trial lasted 7 days. The prosecution presented a compelling case, including surveillance footage showing Richard forcibly abducting Melissa and placing her in the rented minivan. Witnesses included neighbors, a convenience store owner, Richard's mother, and Melissa's sister, Cynthia. On March 6, 2024, closing arguments were delivered. The prosecution argued the evidence clearly pointed to Richard's intent, citing the brutal knife wound from ear to ear as undeniable proof. They urged the jury to consider not only direct evidence but also circumstantial details. In contrast, Richard's defense attorney implored the jury to question everything and avoid being influenced by Richard's past crimes or character. He reminded them that their decision should be based solely on the evidence presented during the trial. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Richard Ford was found guilty of capital murder. The other charges, kidnapping, harassment, and violating a protective order, were dismissed. The sentencing hearing took place the following day, March 7th. During the hearing, Melissa's family members gave emotional impact statements. Cynthia addressed her late sister directly, saying she hoped Melissa knew she had been loved to the moon and back. Through tears, she spoke of Melissa's laughter, support, and how much she relied on her. Turning to Richard, she questioned why he never sought help instead of resorting to violence. Melissa's brother, Fidel Jr., delivered a fiery statement, condemning Richard as an unwanted child, unloved by his father and disowned even by his mother. Fidel admitted he once respected Richard but now despised him for taking Melissa's life. He revealed that, on the day Melissa's body was found, he had also searched for Richard, hoping to exact vengeance before the police could intervene. Melissa's youngest son did not speak in court, but his statement was read aloud by the prosecutor. In it, the boy described the pain of coming home to an empty house and hearing his classmates talk about their mothers. He said he could never forgive his father. Kimberly, Melissa's middle child, shared how she struggled to believe her father was responsible, even after seeing security footage from her aunt's home. She recounted how she broke down when relatives and police confirmed her father's involvement. The sentencing closed one chapter in the devastating case. Richard Ford now faces life in prison, leaving behind a shattered family grappling with the profound loss of Melissa. Elizabeth, the eldest daughter, now 16, shared how a part of her died alongside her mother on August 6th. In an emotional moment, she rhetorically questioned her father, asking how he could have attacked her mother in such a brutal way. She called him a coward, asserting that only a coward could commit such a crime. Taking it a step further, she addressed Richard directly, accusing him of lacking the decency to admit what he had done. She reminded him that his role as a father was to protect, not destroy. Tearfully, Elizabeth mourned the loss of not just her mother, but also the father she once thought she knew. She confessed that during her parents' divorce, she had felt both compassion and fear toward him. Elizabeth lamented that he would no longer be there for milestones like her graduation or her wedding day. Her voice cracked as she shared how much it hurt to lose her mother, who had been her best friend. Melissa's father, Fidel, spoke next, recounting how his grandson had been plagued by nightmares ever since losing his mother. Fidel directed his words at Richard, demanding he keep eye contact with him. He wished for Richard to suffer every day in prison and to be haunted by the memory of Melissa, whose life he had taken. Fidel then spoke lovingly of Melissa, describing her as a light to the family from the day she was born until her last. He reassured everyone present that Melissa would always remain with them in spirit. The court proceedings concluded with the judge sentencing Richard Ford to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Richard avoided making eye contact with his children as he was escorted out of the courtroom. His defense team announced plans to appeal the decision. Following the sentencing, Melissa's family traveled to her birthplace to visit a mural created in her honor. The artwork features a large, smiling portrait of Melissa with a dove flying above her and the words, "I am always with you." A small wrought iron fence surrounds the mural, protecting the flowers her loved ones frequently leave as a tribute to her enduring memory. While standing in front of the mural, Elizabeth and Kimberly spoke to local news station Channel 5. They described the court's decision as liberating, explaining that with their father behind bars, they no longer had to live in fear or hide from him. Cynthia shared how she believed Melissa was still with them in some way, occasionally appearing or making her presence felt. She expressed relief, saying she finally felt justice had been served. Fidel echoed these sentiments, reaffirming that Melissa would always remain in their hearts and continue to watch over their family. When tragedy strikes within a family, the loss and devastation are compounded, especially when the perpetrator is someone who should have been a source of love and support. Despite this unimaginable betrayal, Melissa's 3 children have found strength in their close-knit family. Their bonds have only grown stronger, providing a foundation of love and resilience. As they move forward, the memory of Melissa, a remarkable mother, daughter, and sister, will remain a guiding light in their lives. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. A Target parking lot in Ventura, California. The afternoon sun hangs low over rows of parked cars as shoppers come and go, pushing carts, checking receipts, lost in the ordinary rhythm of a Monday afternoon. A 35-year-old mother walks toward her vehicle. A blonde woman approaches her. She's short, authoritative, and she's carrying something that glints in the sunlight. A badge. Handcuffs. The mother is guided into a blue-green Nissan Altima. No screaming, no struggle. The witnesses barely glance up. Why would they? They've just seen what looks like a routine police arrest. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, except the blonde woman isn't a police officer, and this isn't an arrest. By the time anyone realizes what actually happened in that parking lot, Sherry Daly will have vanished. And the woman who took her? She's been sleeping with Sherry's husband for months. Hi, I'm Michael. Today I bring you another unreal true crime investigation. If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers: 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now, let's dive into today's case. Sherry Renee Daly was born and raised in Southern California during a time when families still left their doors unlocked and children played in the streets until dark. She was a woman who had built her entire life around one fundamental value: taking care of others. At 35 years old, Sherry lived in Ventura, a coastal city about an hour north of Los Angeles. It was the kind of place where people know each other by name, where neighbors wave while picking up the morning paper, where violent tragedies simply don't happen. Or so everyone thought. Sherry was a mother of two young boys who were the absolute center of her universe. In addition to raising her own children, she operated a home daycare, a small business that had become an essential service for several families in the neighborhood. Parents trusted her with their most precious possessions, their kids. Kristen Olson, a local mother, had been leaving her children in Sherry's care since 1988. 8 years of absolute trust. 8 years of watching Sherry treat every child who walked through her door as if they were her own. Her neighbors and the families who depended on her consistently described Sherry with the same words: warm, devoted, reliable. She was the type of person who remembered everyone's birthdays, who baked cookies for school meetings, who always had a moment to listen to other people's problems, even when her own were piling up. According to later testimony, she kept a notebook where she wrote down everything she wanted to do someday. Big dreams and small ones, trips she wanted to take, experiences she wanted to share with her sons when they were older. She was a woman who looked toward the future with hope. But there was something not everyone knew. Behind that facade of suburban normalcy, behind the smiles at parent meetings and quiet afternoons at the park, Sherry was fighting a silent battle to hold together a family that was crumbling from the inside. Sherry was married to Michael Daly, a man most people in the community only knew superficially. Michael worked as a clerk at a local grocery store. At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary family man. He went to work, came home, mowed the lawn on weekends. Nothing remarkable, nothing alarming. But appearances, as we would later learn, can be the most effective disguise of all. John Avila had known Michael since childhood. They had grown up together, been friends for decades. What Avila described in his later testimony painted a disturbing portrait of transformation. According to his words, Michael went from being a polite and respectful young man, even an altar boy at his local Catholic church, to someone completely different. Avila testified that Michael had gotten involved with drugs, specifically crack cocaine, and that he frequented prostitutes. He remembered that Sherry lived in fear, that he himself had advised her multiple times to leave Michael, to take the kids and get out before things got worse. But Sherry stayed. Like so many women in similar situations, she held on to hope that things would improve. She feared the unknown. She felt the pressure to maintain a complete family for her children. So she stayed, and she endured. The Dalys' financial situation was another constant source of tension. Sherry had been forced to pull her children out of their private school because the family could no longer afford the tuition. It was a decision that had devastated her, according to people close to her. Meanwhile, according to testimony that would emerge during the trial, Michael continued spending money on his personal vices. And then there was the other matter. The secret that ran like silent poison through the veins of that marriage. Michael Daly had a co-worker named Diana Jean Hahn. They worked together in the deli section of the same grocery store. Day after day, shift after shift, slicing ham and preparing salads while chatting about their lives, their frustrations, their unfulfilled desires. Diana was approximately the same age as Sherry. She was short in stature, with a quiet, almost childlike demeanor. Some saw her as vulnerable, as someone who needed protection. But there was another side to Diana that few people knew. An extensive profile published by the Los Angeles Times revealed that she had a fascination with the occult and the strange. Friends and acquaintances mentioned that she could shift from being completely docile to having explosive outbursts of temper without warning, as if some internal switch had suddenly flipped. Diana carried her own history of trauma. As a teenager, a basketball backboard collapsed and fell on her during a game. The impact was so severe that she was in a coma for 3 days. Doctors didn't know if she would survive. She survived. And as a result of the accident, she received a legal settlement that guaranteed her more than $1,000 a month until age 65. Over her lifetime, that annuity would be worth close to $1 million. This really caught my attention when I was researching the case. Diana wasn't someone in desperate financial straits. She had a guaranteed income for life. Whatever motivated her wasn't about economic survival. It was something deeper, darker, more complex. The relationship between Michael and Diana became an open secret at work. Co-workers noticed them whispering during breaks, exchanging meaningful glances, taking the same shifts with suspicious frequency. And Sherry knew. According to close friends who would testify later, Sherry was fully aware of her husband's affair, but instead of confronting him, instead of demanding a divorce, she tried to keep her family together. She kept cooking dinners. She kept driving the kids to school. She kept smiling in public while falling apart on the inside. Why? Perhaps for the children. Perhaps because of hope. Perhaps because the devil you know always seems less terrifying than the devil you don't. May 6, 1996, began like any other Monday for Sherry Daly. She woke up early, as always. She prepared breakfast for her boys, helped them get dressed, made sure they had everything they needed for the day ahead. Running a daycare from home meant her morning routine was a carefully choreographed ballet of maternal efficiency. The May sun in Southern California is warm but still gentle, not the crushing heat of summer that would arrive in a few weeks. It was the kind of day that invites you to run errands, to get out of the house, to make the most of the daylight hours. At some point in the afternoon, Sherry got in her car and drove to the Target located on East Main Street, in the commercial heart of Ventura. It was a store she knew well, part of her regular shopping circuit. She probably needed something for the daycare, perhaps household supplies, maybe just a break from the daily routine. The Target parking lot was moderately busy that afternoon. Families coming and going with carts, employees collecting shopping carts, the constant flow of an ordinary commercial afternoon. What happened in that parking lot was witnessed by several people, but none of them understood what they were seeing. None of them thought they should intervene. A blonde woman, short in stature, approached Sherry near her vehicle. The woman carried something that glinted in the sun, a badge. In her hand, a pair of metal handcuffs reflected the afternoon light. The scene that followed looked like something out of any cop show on television. The blonde woman spoke to Sherry, showed her the badge, and guided her toward a Nissan Altima parked nearby. The car was a distinctive color, blue-green, almost teal. Sherry got into the vehicle. There were no screams. There was no visible struggle. Nothing indicated that what witnesses were seeing was a kidnapping rather than a routine arrest. Why would there be? They had just witnessed what appeared to be exactly what any police officer would do with any suspect in any parking lot of any city in the United States. The badge was convincing. The handcuffs were real. The blonde woman's confidence was absolute. The blue-green Nissan Altima pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared into the afternoon traffic. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Sherry Daly alive and knew who she was. The hours passed. Sherry didn't come home for dinner. Her phone rang and rang without answer. At first, her family thought about traffic problems, about some minor delay, about any mundane explanation that didn't involve the unthinkable. But when night fell completely and the silence continued, when the children asked where Mommy was and nobody knew what to say, fear began to settle in like a thick fog that would not lift. Sherry's family reported her missing the following day. The Ventura Police Department, a force more accustomed to handling petty thefts and vandalism than violent disappearances, began an investigation that would quickly take a dark turn. Detectives, including Sergeant Gary McCaskill, who would lead much of the case, began gathering basic information. Where was she last seen? Who did she talk to? Was there anything unusual about her recent behavior? The witnesses from the Target parking lot provided consistent descriptions. Blonde woman, short, badge, handcuffs, blue-green Nissan Altima. The vehicle description became the key piece of evidence. Investigators traced the car. It was a rental. The rental agreement was in the name of Diana Jean Hahn. She had rented it on May 5th, the day before Sherry's disappearance, and returned it on May 7th, the day after. Unlike many cases where the connection between suspect and victim is murky, here the relationship was direct and explosive. Diana Hahn was the mistress of the missing woman's husband. When investigators examined the interior of the returned vehicle, they found what they feared: bloodstains on the seats. The rearview mirror was damaged, as if someone had struck it or torn it off during a violent struggle. The inside of the car told a story of violence that completely contradicted the image of a calm arrest that the witnesses had observed. The Ventura community mobilized in a way that still moves me when I read the news reports from that time. Friends, neighbors, and family members of Sherry organized massive searches during Memorial Day weekend. John Avila, the childhood friend of Michael who had advised Sherry to leave her husband, was one of the main organizers. Hundreds of volunteers combed the rural areas around Ventura, following any lead, any rumor, any hope. In a moment of desperation that illustrates how far a family will go searching for answers, they even consulted a psychic. The woman told them the body would be found near water, but not the ocean. A vague clue, but in the absence of anything better, they clung to it. On June 1st, 1996, almost a month after the disappearance, a group of volunteers arrived at Canada Larga Road. It's a winding path that snakes north of Ventura, heading into the mountains. The terrain is rugged, with deep ravines covered in chaparral and dense vegetation typical of Southern California. Then they smelled it. The unmistakable smell of decomposition is something that, according to those who have experienced it, you never forget. The volunteers descended with ropes into a steep ravine. First they found the sunglasses, then pieces of clothing, and then, at the bottom of that forgotten ravine, they found the remains of Sherry Daly. Official identification was made using dental records on June 3, 1996. What the medical examiner documented was devastating. Sherry had been brutally beaten and stabbed multiple times. One of the stab wounds went directly into her heart, but that wasn't all. The coroner found evidence that someone had attempted to decapitate her using a flat, sharp object, possibly a small hatchet or similar tool. This detail, the partial decapitation, would become a crucial element later when certain questions from a certain person would reveal knowledge that nobody should have had. While Sherry lay in that ravine, while animals and weather did their work on her remains, while her family searched for her desperately, life at the Daly household continued on a disturbingly normal course. Or at least, that's what Michael Daly wanted everyone to believe. Michael didn't show the reaction you would expect from a husband whose wife had just mysteriously disappeared. There were no uncontrollable tears like we see in truly devastated spouses. There was no frantic desperation of someone who doesn't know where their partner is. The detectives who interviewed him noted his strangely controlled composure, as if he were reciting lines from a script he had rehearsed. About a week after Sherry's disappearance, Michael Daly walked into the local courthouse and filed for legal separation from his wife. 1 week. His wife hadn't even been found yet. Nobody knew if she was alive or dead, and he was already preparing the paperwork to divorce her. What I find incredible is that he thought this was going to work, that the police wouldn't notice, that filing separation papers while your wife is missing wouldn't raise exactly the kind of red flags it raised. But the truly revealing moment, what sealed the investigators' perception of Michael Daly, came after the body was found. When detectives went to inform him that they had found his wife's remains, Michael asked questions that chilled the blood of the investigators present, questions that nobody in his situation would ask, questions that revealed impossible knowledge. He asked if Sherry's head was still attached to her body. He asked about a specific necklace she had been wearing. These details had not been made public. The police hadn't revealed the condition of the body to the press or even to the family yet. The attempted decapitation was classified investigation information. How could Michael know about the condition of his wife's head unless he knew exactly what had happened to her? Investigators also discovered another fascinating and disturbing detail: the secret communication system between Michael and Diana. In 1996, cell phones were still not ubiquitous. People used pagers, those small devices that received numerical messages you then had to decode. Michael and Diana had created an entire language of codes. Michael's identification number was 666, the biblical number of the beast. Diana's was 4949. They had codes for love, forever, complete messages compressed into sequences of digits. It was, in essence, the precursor to text messaging, but designed specifically to hide an illicit relationship and, as police increasingly suspected, to coordinate something far worse. Diana Hawn was arrested for the first time on May 18, 1996, even before Sherry's body was found. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The car rented in her name, the bloodstains inside, the witness testimonies describing a short blonde woman using a badge and handcuffs. Everything pointed to her. The investigators were certain they had their primary suspect. But then something happened that enraged Sherry's family and shocked the community. Authorities released Diana Hawn, citing insufficient evidence to file formal charges. Without a body, without confirmation of death, the prosecution didn't feel comfortable proceeding. This is the point where, in my opinion, the pressure on the detectives became immense. They had let a suspect go. They had a terrified community. They had to build a case that could hold up before a jury. The discovery of the body on June 1st changed the entire legal landscape. Now they had a confirmed homicide case. DNA testing, still relatively new technology in criminal investigations in 1996, confirmed that the blood found in the rented Nissan Altima belonged to Sherry Daly. The circumstantial evidence began to pile up: the car rental, the blood, the witnesses, the relationship with the victim's husband, Michael's impossible questions about the body. On August 1st, 1996, Diana Hawn was arrested again. This time, there would be no early release. On August 16th, a grand jury formally indicted her on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. But investigators knew Diana hadn't acted alone. The entire scenario required planning, knowledge of Sherry's schedule, information about her movements. Someone had to provide that intelligence, someone who knew Sherry intimately. On November 15, 1996, Michael Daly was arrested and charged with the same crimes. The prosecution maintained that he had planned his wife's murder together with his lover. The testimonies painted a devastating portrait of Michael. Friends and acquaintances described his transformation from respectable young man to someone involved with drugs and prostitution. They detailed his coldness, his suspicious questions about the condition of Sherry's body, his hasty filing for separation. The prosecutors argued that Michael feared a divorce would ruin him financially. There were questions about life insurance and economic benefits. What I found in the court records left me speechless. This wasn't just a crime of passion. This was a calculated plan. Diana Hawn was tried first. Her trial became a media spectacle, with local press covering every detail, every witness, every revelation. The prosecution presented Diana as a calculating and greedy woman, willing to kill to keep the man she loved. They painted a picture of obsession, of a woman so consumed by her desire for Michael that she would eliminate anyone standing in her way. The defense tried to portray her as a manipulated person, a victim of Michael Daly's charms and manipulations. They suggested she was vulnerable, damaged by her childhood head injury, susceptible to the influence of a controlling man. In a jail interview during the deliberations of Michael's trial, Diana called her former lover a psychotic. She claimed to be innocent. She denied having practiced witchcraft, a rumor that had circulated during the case and that added a bizarre element to an already disturbing story. On September 26, 1997, the jury declared Diana Hahn guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. On November 24th, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael Daly went to trial in 1998. His case was more complex because he wasn't physically present during the kidnapping and murder. The prosecution had to prove he had been the mastermind behind the crime. The testimonies were devastating. Friends described his transformation from respectable young man to someone involved with drugs and prostitution. They detailed his coldness, his suspicious questions about Sherry's body, his hasty separation filing while his wife was still missing. The pager codes became particularly damning evidence. 666 as his identifier, the coded love messages, the communication system designed for secrecy. It all painted a picture of two people coordinating in the shadows. On April 6, 1998, Michael Daly was declared guilty of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The sentencing phase was dramatic. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision and deadlocked. As a result, Michael received the same sentence as Diana: life in prison without the possibility of parole. If you ask me, the sentence seems appropriate given the context. What matters is that both will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. They will never get out. They will never breathe free air again. After the convictions, Sherry's children were placed in the care of their maternal grandparents. A judge awarded the boys a $6.4 million judgment against Diana Hahn in a wrongful death civil lawsuit. Much of that money would come from the annuity Diana received for her teenage accident. The irony isn't lost on me. The money she received for her own tragedy would compensate for the tragedy she caused. In 2001, an appellate court upheld Michael Daly's conviction, though they eliminated an aggravating circumstance related to lying in wait because it didn't affect his life sentence either way. In 2023, Diana Hahn attempted to request resentencing under new California laws. The court determined she was ineligible because she was the actual killer, not merely an accomplice. She was the one who wore the badge. She was the one who clicked the handcuffs. This case affected me more than I expected. There's something about the image of Sherry being led away in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses who thought they were seeing something legitimate, that got stuck in my head and won't leave. This reminds me of other cases we've covered where blind trust in authority figures allowed predators to act with impunity. It's a pattern we see again and again. The uniform, the badge, the confidence. And we just comply. We don't question. We don't intervene. Sherry Daly was a woman who dedicated her life to caring for others. She cared for her children. She cared for her neighbors' children. She tried to hold together a family that didn't deserve her loyalty. And in the end, it was the trust of strangers, their willingness not to question a figure of authority, that allowed her killer to take her from this world without anyone lifting a hand to help. Sometimes I think about those witnesses in the Target parking lot, about how they must have felt when they learned the truth, about how that moment of passivity must haunt them still. Sherry was 35 years old. She had dreams. She had that notebook where she wrote down everything she wanted to do someday. Those somedays never came. If this case left you thinking like it did me, tell me in the comments which part impacted you the most. I love reading your reflections and theories about these cases. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, from learning about the dangers of trusting blindly, share it. Sometimes the difference between life and death is a question we decide not to ask. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. The road was dark and empty when the car pulled over. No struggle, no panic, just a quiet stop on the side of a rural highway. She stayed in the driver's seat, legs crossed, as if expecting a conversation, not violence. Moments later, another vehicle stopped behind her. One sound shattered the silence. By sunrise, she was dead. And the truth of what happened on that road was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Livy Lewis was born in the small East Texas town of Hemphill into a close family that believed in hard work, education, and staying together. She grew up surrounded by pine trees, dirt roads, and relatives who knew every detail of her life. At the center of that world stood her mother, Darcy, and her grandmother, Janice. They watched her move from a serious little girl into a young woman who wanted to build a future far beyond the limits of a rural county. As a child, she often acted older than her years. She liked plans, lists, and routines. She preferred order over chaos and tried to help at home rather than cause trouble. Money stayed tight in the family, so she learned early that every small job and every bill mattered. Relatives remembered a girl who noticed other people's problems and felt a strong urge to help, whether the person in front of her was a younger cousin, an older neighbor, or a stranger in a store. School gave her a place to prove herself. From the first grade, she brought home strong marks and took pride in them. Teachers saw a student who sat close to the front, did her work on time, and rarely needed reminders. She did not chase attention, but she earned quiet respect. Friends saw a girl who laughed easily in safe company, loved inside jokes, and protected the people she cared about. She chose a small circle, not a crowd, and in that circle she became a steady presence. During her teens, that sense of responsibility grew. At Hemphill High School, she rose to the top of her class. While others talked mostly about parties or leaving town, she focused on assignments, tests, and long-term plans. She joined school activities but never let them overshadow her grades. Teachers saw her as dependable. Classmates knew she was the one who would share notes, help study before an exam, and still hold her own dreams close to her chest. By the later years of high school, she had already chosen a path. She wanted a career in healthcare. Instead of waiting for college, she enrolled in a program that let her train as a certified nursing assistant while still in school. She studied anatomy and basic care, spent hours in clinical practice, and passed the state exam. When she graduated, she did so as an honor student who already held a professional credential and a clear idea of her next steps. After graduation, she enrolled at Stephen F. Austin State University, a regional university only a drive away but a world apart from her small hometown. She started college-level study with the goal of becoming a nurse and later a physician assistant. At the same time, she began working as a nursing assistant at a local facility. Her days filled with classes, her evenings and nights with shifts. The work involved bathing, feeding, and lifting older residents, and she handled it with patience and care. Residents at the nursing home warmed to her quickly. Staff remembered how she spoke gently and tried to preserve dignity in every task. She moved fast but never seemed rushed when a resident needed reassurance. One coworker, Taylor, became especially close. Taylor had a young daughter, and in their friendship, Livy almost took the role of a younger sister. They worked together, supported each other through long shifts, and gave one another a simple sense of family during difficult days. Shortly before the events that later drew public attention, her life followed a demanding but hopeful routine. She attended university classes, studied for exams, worked at the nursing home, and spent limited free time with her mother, grandmother, cousins, and a few close friends. Her dreams stayed clear. She wanted a stable home, a partner who respected her, and a career where she could keep helping vulnerable people. She did not look for drama. She looked for stability. The man who would change her path, Matthew Hoy Edgar, came from the same region and roughly the same world. He also grew up in Sabine County, surrounded by woods and small-town routines. By his early 20s, he had already married a woman named Montana and had 2 sons with her. People in the area knew him as a local man who drifted between jobs and sometimes drank heavily. He and Livy moved in overlapping social circles long before either of them became central to a criminal case. They met through mutual friends and local gatherings. At first, they were simply part of the same crowd. She was a teenager close to finishing high school. He was a married father. Over time, late-night messages and social media contacts shifted that connection. He paid attention to her, praised her maturity, and made her feel seen. For a young woman who wanted a serious future and a ready-made family, that attention carried weight, even though it came from a man who still lived with his wife. Those first private conversations took place in secret. He told her not to talk about them. She felt guilty and pulled back, not wanting to be the reason a family broke apart. For a while, she returned her focus to school and work. Then, his marriage fractured under the weight of repeated infidelity. He moved out, acknowledged to his wife that he had cheated, and presented himself to the outside world as a man starting over. Soon, he turned again to the younger woman who had already shown interest. When he approached her this time, he did so as someone who claimed to be free. He had 2 young sons who needed care. He said he wanted a new life and a real partner. Her desire for stability and family made that story persuasive. They started seeing each other more often. She helped with the boys, cooked, played, and tried to offer them consistency. For a time, it looked as if she had found what she wanted: a home, children to love, and an adult relationship built around shared responsibility. In that early period, there were real moments of happiness. They celebrated small milestones together, visited with his relatives, and spent quiet evenings at home. She decorated the boys' rooms, planned simple routines, and posted photos that suggested a normal blended family. From the outside, some people saw an older man with a younger partner and 2 children, struggling but trying to manage. From her perspective, she had invested her heart and energy in a serious relationship. The first signs of trouble appeared in small ways. He drank more than she liked and became moody when he did. Jealousy surfaced. He asked about her phone, questioned her friendships, and complained when she spent time with others. He alternated between charm and irritation, between warmth and sudden anger. She explained those changes as stress or alcohol, believing she could help him control his temper if she stayed patient and loving. Over time, those red flags turned into clear warnings. Arguments became more intense and sometimes physical. She sent him messages saying that her body hurt and asking why he kept putting his hands on her. She told him she feared him when he drank. She sent a cousin a photograph that showed her nose swollen and damaged and said it came from a fight with him. Friends noticed bruises, emotional exhaustion, and a level of tension that did not fit a healthy relationship. People close to her grew worried. Her coworker and housemate saw how he behaved when drunk and later described him as abusive in more than one sense. Her cousin told her that the pattern she was living through fit the cycle of domestic violence. Childhood friends urged her to leave and focus on nursing school and work. She heard their concerns but saw the children, the home she had tried to build, and the man who still apologized and promised to change. She stayed. Each cycle followed a similar path. An argument exploded, sometimes with physical violence. She thought about leaving. He cried, said he loved her, swore he would do better, and reminded her of the boys who had grown attached to her. She reminded herself that she had already invested years and energy, and that leaving would hurt more than staying. Again and again, she hoped the caring side of him would win over the violent side. The presence of his ex-wife, Montana, complicated everything further. At first, the two women were on opposite sides of a painful divide. Montana had lost her husband to a younger woman. Livy had stepped into a home that once belonged to another family. Over time, though, a strange form of friendship arose between them. Montana and Livy exchanged messages, spent time together, and began to treat each other as allies rather than rivals. Edgar himself later described them as close. For Livy, that bond felt like progress. She believed that the one person who understood Edgar's worst moments now stood beside her instead of against her. To others, the situation looked unstable and risky. Edgar still held emotional ties to his ex-wife. He moved back and forth between them in his words and actions. On her 19th birthday, he messaged Montana that he had cheated on Livy only with her and not with other women. When that truth surfaced, it caused deep pain and embarrassment for the young woman who had trusted him. By the autumn of 2020, the relationship had reached a critical point. The pattern of jealousy, drinking, physical violence, and temporary reconciliation had repeated many times. She had begun to pull away and even started to see another man who treated her more kindly. She wanted distance from Edgar and a chance to breathe. He struggled to accept that shift. For a man who liked control, the idea of losing a partner who helped with his children and his daily life felt like an attack. In the last weeks before Halloween, phone messages between them showed growing tension. He accused her of betrayal and abandonment. She wrote about fear and the need for change. Around them, the small community moved toward its usual seasonal gatherings, including a pre-Halloween party at the rural home of a friend named Bobby. That party would bring together Edgar, his ex-wife, his children, and the young woman who had tried and failed to change him. On the evening of October 30th, 2020, people gathered at Bobby's property to relax, listen to music, and drink. Among them were Livy, some of her friends, Edgar, Montana, and the two boys. At first, the scene looked like many other country gatherings. Children played. Adults moved between the yard and the house. Drinks passed from hand to hand. Conversations mixed people who had known each other for years. As hours passed and alcohol flowed, the atmosphere changed. Montana and Livy spent more time together, talking and laughing. From witnesses' descriptions, they appeared comfortable around each other. Edgar drank whiskey and beer and grew more withdrawn. He watched the two women who defined his romantic life stand together, and he did not control the situation. His frustration and jealousy simmered beneath the surface. Later that night, after some guests had already left, he learned that Livy might stay and sleep at Bobby's house. In his mind, this possibility joined with fears about another man in her life. His anger erupted. Outside near the vehicles, he confronted Montana. She later said he grabbed her by the neck and tried to choke her. Bobby saw him attack her car, kicking doors and striking windows. He restrained Edgar so that Montana and the children could leave safely. Livy also left the property. Montana drove with the children to the property where Edgar's mother and grandparents lived. Edgar followed there and confronted her again, still drunk and furious, still accusing her of siding with Livy against him. The argument continued on the yard and spilled into the house. Eventually he left, and she stayed inside with the children and his relatives. At that point, phone messages between them took over. He sent angry words, blamed her for the night, and hinted at violence. In those early morning messages, he painted himself as cornered by betrayal. He talked about harming people who, in his view, had ruined his life. Around 3:22 in the morning, he wrote that he was leaving and told her to come for the boys. Investigators later believed that he left the property with his cousin's truck, a rifle, and the intention to confront the young woman who had tried to move on from him. Sometime between that moment and dawn, his path crossed with hers again. She drove along Farm to Market Road 83, a quiet highway east of Hemphill. At some point, her car pulled to the shoulder and stopped. Her body position after death suggested that she remained in the driver's seat with her legs crossed, as if she had expected a conversation, not an attack. There, within a short distance of her front seat, a rifle fired a single shot that entered her neck and killed her. When authorities reconstructed events, they concluded that the rifle used in that shooting belonged to Edgar. Bullet fragments from the car and the body matched test rounds from the weapon recovered nearby. After the shot, her car sat silent on the roadside in the dark. A truck linked to Edgar's family came to a stop behind it. He ended up on the ground between the vehicles, curled on his side, covered in blood from an unexplained source, with no injuries that could account for it. A passing driver discovered the scene shortly after 5 in the morning. The driver noticed the car in an unusual position, stopped, and saw a young woman slumped over the steering wheel. The driver called for help. Emergency responders arrived, checked for signs of life, and found none. They confirmed that she was dead and saw the man on the ground behind her. They sent him by ambulance to a hospital and secured the roadside for investigators. News reached her mother through a friend, not through official channels. Darcy drove toward the flashing lights and patrol cars and tried to reach the officers. For a painful period, no one gave her a direct answer. Only when she saw the car and the way people avoided her eyes did she understand that her only child lay inside, already gone. In that moment, 19 years of plans and dreams broke apart on a 2-lane road. At the hospital, an investigator spoke with Edgar. He said he had drunk heavily at home and remembered lying on his porch, then waking up in an ambulance. He claimed that he did not know how he had reached the scene or what had happened there. Officers collected his clothing and noted the blood on his face and body. They saw that he had no serious wounds. Within hours, they placed him under arrest on a murder charge and began the detailed work of building a case. The autopsy confirmed what the scene had already suggested. A single shot from a high-powered rifle had entered the side of her neck and caused massive damage. The medical examiner also noted signs of blunt force injuries that matched earlier stories of physical abuse. Toxicology tests on her blood did not show anything that would have explained strange behavior on her part. The cause of death was straightforward and violent. Laboratory work on his clothing and the physical evidence added important details and some confusion. A small stain on his pants contained her blood. The blood on his face, however, came from an unidentified third person. On the rifle, investigators did not find usable fingerprints or clear DNA. Some objects from the scene carried mixed DNA profiles that did not match either him or her. The prosecution later argued that these gaps did not erase the larger picture. The defense built much of its argument around them. Digital evidence strengthened the case against him. Phone records and message histories showed his movements the night of the killing and the words he chose in the hours before it. In one crucial message, sent long before the passerby found the car, he replied to a question about where she was by stating that she was already dead. Investigators saw that as proof that he had been present at the moment of death. Voice calls, location data, and timelines pointed in the same direction. Detectives also examined the possibility that Montana had taken part more directly. Some people who supported him tried to shift blame toward her. Investigators interviewed her many times, checked her account against phone data, and used a polygraph as another tool. They concluded that she had remained at the grandparents' property after going inside and that no evidence placed her at the scene on the roadside. Their primary focus stayed on the man who had admitted drinking heavily, who had sent threatening messages, and who had appeared beside the body. Legal delays then collided with emotional urgency. Pandemic conditions slowed court operations across the state. Grand juries met less often. Texas law limited how long authorities could keep a person in jail without an indictment. After about 90 days, a judge had to consider bond. Despite the district attorney's arguments and the family's fears, the court granted bond set at $50,000. Edgar left jail under electronic monitoring, returning to the same small community where the killing had occurred. For the family, his release felt like another blow. They saw him around town. In one incident, her mother encountered him at a store and confronted him in grief and anger. She threw items in his direction and shouted accusations. He reported the confrontation, and officers arrested her. Prosecutors later dropped the charges, but the moment revealed how deep the pain ran on all sides and how small the town remained. In January 2022, the case finally reached trial. He arrived at the courthouse with a protective vest and sat at the defense table. Prosecutors described a pattern of domestic violence and a night of jealousy and rage that ended with a rifle shot. They showed the jury photographs of injuries, the crime scene, and the roadside. They presented the autopsy findings, the ballistic match between the bullet fragments and the rifle, and the text messages that tracked the path from argument to homicide. Witnesses described her as a kind, ambitious young woman who had wanted nothing more than a stable home and a career in healthcare. They described him as a jealous, controlling partner who drank heavily and used his hands to enforce his will. The lead investigator explained the significance of the blood on his pants, the placement of the vehicles, and the time-stamped message that declared her dead before any official notification. The defense tried to plant seeds of doubt. They stressed the lack of fingerprints and DNA on the rifle, the mixed DNA on some items, and the unknown source of blood on his face. They suggested that another person could have handled the weapon or even fired it. They returned again and again to his statement that he blacked out and did not remember the critical moments, hinting that without clear memory, intent might be missing or someone else might be responsible. As the trial unfolded, another twist appeared. After attending the first part of the proceedings, he failed to show up in court. His ankle monitor battery went dead and he vanished. The judge allowed the trial to continue in his absence as the law permitted. The jury stayed in place. heard closing arguments, and retired to deliberate. They returned with a verdict of guilty on the murder charge and recommended a sentence of 99 years in prison and a fine. He now became both a convicted murderer and a fugitive. Law enforcement agencies at local, state, and federal levels worked together to locate him. He appeared on lists of most wanted fugitives. Tips came in, some from faraway states, but in the end, he stayed close to home. In December 2022, officers watched a house near his grandparents' property, saw a man step onto the back porch, and recognized him. They moved in and arrested him without incident, ending almost a year on the run. With him back in custody, the court scheduled a formal sentencing hearing. In early January 2023, he stood before a judge who repeated the 99-year sentence directly to him. After that, the court allowed the family to speak. Her grandmother described the girl who had earned top grades, completed nursing assistant training, and started college. Her mother chose to let a recording of her daughter's graduation speech speak for her. The sound of a proud teenager talking about her future filled the courtroom one last time. He then entered the state prison system to begin serving his sentence. Records showed that he would not even become eligible for parole until decades later. For him, daily life narrowed to cells, counts, and long-term confinement. For her family and friends, life became a long process of grieving and remembering. They set up a scholarship in her name to help other local students pursue education, especially in healthcare, so that her passion for caring work would continue in others. The case drew national attention. Media outlets reported on the killing, the trial, his disappearance, and his capture. A television program devoted to true crime included her case in an episode, focusing on his claim of an alcohol-induced blackout while also telling the story of her short life. For the family, every public mention brought both pain and comfort, keeping her name alive while forcing them to relive the worst moments. Over time, her story served as an example of how domestic violence built slowly and then exploded. It showed how control and jealousy often hid behind declarations of love. It showed how hard it was for victims to leave when children and shared towns tied them to abusive partners. It also showed how delays in the legal system could place dangerous people back into communities before trials had a chance to begin. Her family and many supporters hoped that sharing her experience would help others recognize danger earlier. They encourage people to take seriously any signs of control, isolation, sudden rage, or physical harm in intimate relationships, and to reach out for help. They supported the spread of information about local shelters, hotlines, and organizations that helped people leave abusive situations, both in East Texas and elsewhere. As people continued to tell the story of Livy Lewis, they kept the focus on who she had been. A bright, hard-working young woman who loved her family, carried tenderness into her work, and believed deeply in the value of stability and care. The narrative closed with a quiet thank you to everyone who carried her memory forward, and a gentle invitation for listeners to respond with respect, pay attention to the signs of abuse around them, and support those who might be living in fear. In that way, her life, though cut short, continued to protect others. The snow fell relentlessly that January evening in Philadelphia, blanketing the city in white silence. Inside apartment 603 at the Venice Lofts in the Manayunk neighborhood, a young woman was about to meet a fate so violent, so brutal, that it would spark a 14-year battle for truth that continues to this day. Ellen Greenberg was 27 years old. She was a first-grade teacher beloved by her students. She was planning a wedding. She had her whole life ahead of her. But on January 26, 2011, something happened in that sixth-floor apartment that authorities would call suicide, despite 20 stab wounds scattered across her body, including 10 to the back of her head and neck. This is the story of a death that defies explanation, a ruling that defies logic, and a family's relentless fight against a system that seems determined to keep the truth buried. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Ellen Ray Greenberg entered the world on June 23, 1983, in New York City, the cherished only child of Josh and Sandy Greenberg. Her childhood was filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of unconditional love that builds unshakable confidence. When the family relocated to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in the mid-90s, Ellen adapted seamlessly, her natural charisma drawing friends to her like moths to flame. At Penn State University, Ellen's vivacious personality found its perfect outlet. She worked as a lionizer, introducing athletes and their families to campus life, even assisting on the football field. Her smile was infectious. Her energy was boundless. Everyone who met Ellen remembered her. After earning her communications degree, Ellen made a pivotal decision. The career path to speech pathology didn't feel right, so she pivoted, attending Temple University at night to earn her teaching credentials. By 2011, she had found her calling as a first-grade teacher at Juniata Park Academy in Philadelphia. The children adored her. The parents praised her. Ellen had discovered her purpose. Then came Sam Goldberg. Samuel Hankin Goldberg grew up in Comfort in Pennsylvania, the son of Richard Goldberg, a successful businessman who owned a confidential document destruction company. By the time Sam met Ellen, he was working as a producer for NBC Sports, charming, charismatic, and well-connected in Philadelphia's tight-knit Jewish community. They met through mutual friends around 2007. The connection was immediate. Sam whisked Ellen away to South Carolina while he was covering the PGA Tour, and when she returned, they were official. To those around them, they seemed perfect together. After 3 years of dating, Sam proposed to Ellen on a California beach in June 2010. The wedding was set for August 13, 2011, at the historic Hotel Hershey. But beneath the glossy surface, cracks were beginning to show. Friends noticed changes in Ellen after the engagement. Her best friend, Allison Stern, observed that Ellen was spending less time with her own circle and more time with Sam's family. Ellen became secretive about wedding plans, which seemed odd for someone planning what should have been the happiest day of her life. Colleagues at school noticed Ellen rarely wore her engagement ring, explaining vaguely that it rolled on her finger. More troubling were the conversations Ellen began having with her family. In December 2010, just 1 month before her death, Ellen sent her parents a startling text message expressing that she wanted to leave her current situation. She told her father she was considering quitting her teaching job mid-year and moving back home to Harrisburg. For someone who loved her students and had worked so hard for her credentials, this was shocking. Ellen began seeing a psychiatrist for anxiety. She was prescribed medication. Yet, according to her psychiatrist's detailed notes, Ellen's face would light up whenever she talked about Sam or their upcoming wedding. There were no documented suicidal thoughts, no warnings of what was supposedly to come. January 26, 2011, dawned gray and ominous. A powerful nor'easter was bearing down on Philadelphia, promising heavy snow and dangerous conditions. Schools across the city made the decision to dismiss early. At approximately noon, Ellen Greenberg left Juniata Park Academy as the first snowflakes began to fall. She texted a friend expressing gratitude for the early dismissal. Just another teacher grateful for an unexpected break, looking forward to a cozy afternoon at home. At 1:26 p.m., surveillance footage captured Ellen stopping at a gas station on Umbria Street, not far from Venice Lofts. She filled her tank completely, spending $41.20 for nearly 13 gallons of unleaded gasoline. It was a practical decision. A full tank would prevent fuel lines from freezing during the massive storm. This was someone thinking about tomorrow, someone planning for the future. Ellen arrived home at her sixth-floor apartment sometime after 1:30 p.m. Inside, she went about ordinary domestic tasks. In the kitchen, she prepared fruit, slicing an orange, washing blueberries in a strainer. 2 clean kitchen knives sat in the sink. She opened her laptop to wedding planning websites, continuing the preparations for the August celebration that would never happen. According to building surveillance footage, Sam Goldberg left the apartment at 4:45 p.m., heading to the gym in their building. He swiped his key card at the gym entrance. This was routine. He often worked out in the building's fitness center. Nothing about this moment seemed unusual, but what happened next would become one of the most controversial 911 calls in Philadelphia history. At approximately 6 p.m., Sam returned to the 6th floor. He tried his key in the apartment door. It opened a few inches, then stopped. The swing bar latch, a simple hotel-style security lock, was engaged from inside. Ellen wasn't answering his calls. She wasn't responding to his knocking. Sam pulled out his phone and began texting Ellen. The messages grew increasingly frustrated, demanding she open the door, questioning what she was doing, expressing mounting anger that she had better have an excuse for locking him out. Security footage shows Sam alone in the hallway. He spoke with building doorman Phil Hanton, asking for help breaking down the door. Hanton, following building policy, declined but offered to call police. Sam refused. He would handle this himself. Using his shoulder, Sam forced the door open, dislodging the screws holding the swing bar latch. The door itself remained undamaged. Only the lock mechanism broke free. Sam pushed inside. What he found would become the subject of 14 years of questions, investigations, lawsuits, and controversy. At 6:33 p.m., Sam Goldberg's frantic call came into Philadelphia's 911 dispatch center. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. Sam's was anything but. He told them he needed help immediately, that he had just walked into his apartment and found his fiancée on the floor with blood everywhere. The operator asked basic questions. What's the address? Is she breathing? Where's the blood coming from? Sam said he didn't know, that he was looking at her but couldn't see anything broken. He mentioned her face looked a little purple. Then came a detail that would haunt this case forever. The 911 operator, trying to understand the situation, asked if Ellen might have fallen. Sam suggested she may have slipped, that there was blood on the table. The operator instructed Sam to check if Ellen was breathing, to see if her chest was rising and falling. Sam said he couldn't see any movement. Following protocol, the dispatcher began giving instructions for CPR, telling Sam he might need to move Ellen's body. Then, more than 2 minutes into the call, Sam made a shocking discovery. He exclaimed that she had stabbed herself. The operator paused, asking him to repeat that. Sam clarified that she had fallen on a knife, that there was a knife sticking out of her heart. The operator asked if the knife was still in her chest. Sam confirmed it was, quickly adding that he hadn't removed it. The calm operator asked how far the knife had penetrated. Sam estimated it looked deep, maybe 3 or 4 inches, a long knife. The operator instructed him firmly not to touch anything. Emergency responders arrived at 6:36 p.m. They found Ellen Greenberg on the kitchen floor, her back propped against the lower cabinets near the range. She was fully dressed in a dark, zippered hoodie, gray sweatpants, and tan Ugg boots. A white towel was clutched in her left hand. Her right hand was closed in a loose fist. A pair of eyeglasses lay nearby on the floor, and protruding from her chest, buried 4 inches deep, was a 10-inch serrated kitchen knife. Ellen's body was cold. Her fingertips were blue. The blood around her had coagulated. The paramedics knew immediately they were looking at someone who had been dead for some time. They pronounced Ellen Greenberg deceased at 6:40 p.m. and stepped back to let the police take over. What the first officers on scene didn't realize was that they were looking at far more than 20 stab wounds to Ellen's body. 10 were to her chest and abdomen, but 10 more were to the back of her head and neck. Ellen also had at least 11 bruises in various stages of healing scattered across her body. Yet somehow, despite this evidence of extreme violence, the responding officers made a decision that would compromise the entire investigation. They determined Ellen's death was a suicide. No crime scene was preserved. No evidence was properly secured. The apartment wasn't treated as a potential homicide scene. Sam Goldberg, surrounded by friends and family members who had arrived quickly, was cooperative with initial questioning. He was never handcuffed, never separated from the scene, never treated as anything other than a grieving fiancé who had discovered his bride-to-be's tragic suicide. By the next morning, that initial assessment would be challenged. But by then, it would be too late. On the morning of January 27, 2011, Dr. Marlon Osborne conducted Ellen Greenberg's autopsy at the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office. What he documented would become the foundation of a legal battle that continues to this day. The wounds were extensive and disturbing. 20 stab wounds total, wound after wound to her chest, each one documented with clinical precision, multiple penetrations to her abdomen. Then the injuries that seemed impossible for a suicide. 10 stab wounds to the back of Ellen's neck and head. One particularly deep wound to the back of her neck had penetrated so deeply it had gone through her spinal cord. The bruises told another story. 11 contusions in different stages of healing, suggesting a pattern of injuries over time. Some were fresh. Others were days or weeks old. Dr. Osborne made his initial determination. Ellen Greenberg had been stabbed by another person. He classified the manner of death as homicide. For Ellen's parents, Josh and Sandy Greenberg, who had rushed to Philadelphia from Harrisburg, this ruling made tragic sense. Their daughter hadn't been suicidal, she had been murdered. The investigation would now focus on finding her killer. But then something highly unusual happened. Members of the Philadelphia Police Department contacted the medical examiner's office to dispute the homicide ruling. A meeting was hastily arranged that included Dr. Osborne, police detectives, and representatives from the district attorney's office. Both Dr. Osborne and his supervisor, medical examiner Sam Galino, would later testify that such a meeting was unprecedented in their experience. The police presented their case for suicide. The apartment door had been latched from the inside, they claimed, with Sam Goldberg locked out. A building security guard had reportedly been present when Sam broke down the door, confirming the lock was engaged. There were no signs of forced entry from the balcony, and the snow on that balcony appeared undisturbed. Police argued that no one else could have been in the apartment when Ellen died. Under this pressure from law enforcement, Dr. Osborne made a decision he would come to regret. On April 11, 2011, he officially changed Ellen Greenberg's manner of death from homicide to suicide. Josh and Sandy Greenberg learned about this reversal not from official channels, but from media reports. Their daughter's killer investigation had been shut down without explanation. Ellen's death certificate would forever read suicide. The Greenbergs refused to accept it. In the weeks and months following Ellen's death, Josh and Sandy Greenberg began their own investigation. What they uncovered was a cascade of inconsistencies, procedural failures, and evidence that seemed to contradict the official suicide ruling at every turn. First, there was the matter of the swing bar latch and the security guard. Police had told Dr. Osborne that building security had been present when Sam broke down the door, confirming it had been latched from inside. This detail became crucial to the suicide determination. If Ellen had been alone with the door secured from within, how could anyone else have harmed her? But surveillance footage told a different story. The video clearly showed Sam Goldberg alone in the hallway outside apartment 603. Building doorman Phil Hansen later signed a sworn declaration stating unequivocally that he had not accompanied Goldberg to the 6th floor and was not present when the door was broken down. The fundamental premise upon which the suicide ruling rested was demonstrably false. More troubling still, an analysis of the swing bar latch itself revealed it could be manipulated from outside. The apartment security experts demonstrated that such locks could be engaged by someone exiting, then pulling the door closed in a specific way. The locked door proved nothing. Then, there was the 911 call itself. Linguistic experts and investigators who reviewed the recording found it deeply problematic. Sam Goldberg's initial description of Ellen's condition evolved dramatically during the call. He first suggested she had fallen or hit her head. Only after more than 2 minutes did he mention the knife protruding from her chest. For someone who had just broken down a door and discovered his fiancée covered in blood, this seemed like a staggering detail to overlook. The Greenbergs hired their own forensic experts to review the evidence. The findings were damning. Dr. Cyril Vecht, a renowned forensic pathologist, concluded that Ellen's death was strongly suspicious of homicide. He noted the impossibility of self-inflicting wounds to the back of the head and neck, particularly with the force necessary to penetrate the spinal cord. Other experts examined the blood spatter patterns and concluded they were inconsistent with self-infliction. The position of Ellen's body, propped against the cabinets, raised questions about how she could have stabbed herself repeatedly and then arranged herself in that particular position. Perhaps most disturbing was evidence that some wounds appeared to have been inflicted after Ellen's heart had stopped beating. Dr. Lindsay Emery, a neuropathologist who examined samples from Ellen's cervical spine, found evidence suggesting at least one wound to the neck showed no active hemorrhaging, indicating Ellen may have already been dead when that injury occurred. If she was already dead, she obviously couldn't have stabbed herself. The bruises on Ellen's body told yet another story. 11 contusions in various stages of healing suggested a pattern of abuse over time. Some were fresh from the day she died. Others were days or weeks old. Outside pathologists examining photographs described the pattern as consistent with repeated beating. Ellen's psychiatrist's notes became another crucial piece of evidence. While the suicide ruling emphasized Ellen's anxiety and work stress, the detailed session notes painted a different picture. Yes, Ellen had been anxious about her job and wedding planning, but she showed no suicidal ideation. In fact, the notes specifically mentioned that Ellen's demeanor would brighten considerably when discussing Sam or her upcoming marriage. These were not the observations of someone planning to take her own life. As the Greenbergs dug deeper, they uncovered what appeared to be a systematic failure to properly investigate Ellen's death from the very beginning. The crime scene had been catastrophically compromised. On the night of January 26th, responding officers made the decision that Ellen's death was a suicide and left the scene after the medical examiner's investigators departed. They didn't secure the apartment as a potential crime scene. They didn't preserve evidence. They didn't process the scene for fingerprints or DNA beyond the most cursory examination. But the real controversy began the next morning. On January 27th, building property manager Melissa Ware received a phone call from a male relative of Samuel Goldberg requesting access to apartment 603 to retrieve personal items for the funeral. Ware contacted the Philadelphia Police Department to confirm there were no restrictions on entering the apartment. The police gave permission. That same morning, Sam's uncle, James Schwartzman, entered the apartment. This wasn't just any uncle. James Schwartzman was the chairman of the Pennsylvania Judicial Conduct Board, one of the most powerful legal figures in the state. He removed Ellen's iPhone, her personal laptop, her work laptop, and Sam's laptop from the apartment. The chain of custody for these critical pieces of evidence was irrevocably broken. Even more troubling, Ware was advised by police to hire a crime scene cleanup crew. By the time Philadelphia homicide detectives obtained a search warrant to properly process the apartment on January 28th, 2 days after Ellen's death, the scene had been thoroughly cleaned and sanitized. Blood evidence was gone. Any trace DNA was destroyed. The apartment had been restored to its pre-death condition. When detectives finally demanded the electronic devices from Schwartzman, they received them on January 29th. But the devices had been in the possession of Sam Goldberg's family for 48 critical hours, plenty of time for any incriminating evidence to be reviewed or deleted. Then there was Dr. Marlon Osborne himself. The Greenbergs discovered that Osborne had a troubled history at the medical examiner's office. In 2012, his supervisor had written multiple memos citing errors and discrepancies in Osborne's work, some described as very severe with potentially grave consequences. This was the pathologist whose judgment on Ellen's death had been trusted implicitly, whose change from homicide to suicide had closed the investigation. Josh and Sandy Greenberg refused to let their daughter's case die in obscurity. In October 2019, they filed a civil lawsuit against the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office and Dr. Marlon Osborne, seeking to change Ellen's manner of death to homicide or undetermined. The lawsuit forced the release of thousands of pages of documents, autopsy photographs, police reports, and internal communications that had been hidden from public view for years. The evidence was shocking. In 2018, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro took over the case from Philadelphia authorities. For years, the Greenbergs provided Shapiro's office with mountains of new evidence, over 10 gigabytes of data, including detailed forensic files, 3D analyses of each of the 20 stab wounds, and lengthy depositions from medical examiner officials. The family waited for action. In 2019, Shapiro's office announced they were closing the investigation, citing the computer searches allegedly showing suicidal ideation. The Greenbergs were devastated. Then in 2022, Internet sleuths made a stunning discovery. Attorney General Shapiro had personal connections to both Sam Goldberg's family and to James Schwartzman. The appearance of conflict of interest was undeniable. Under mounting public pressure, Shapiro's office transferred the case to the Chester County District Attorney's Office. The Chester County DA reviewed the case and announced in November 2024 that they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime had been committed. The investigation was declared inactive. Sam was never named as a suspect. He was never charged with any crime. He cooperated with initial police questioning, though the investigation was so cursory that meaningful interrogation never occurred. By 2014, just 3 years after Ellen's death, Sam married Caroline Schnee in a lavish ceremony at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. The couple now has children and lives a quiet life. Sam works as a freelance senior producer. He has never publicly addressed the growing chorus of voices demanding answers about what really happened to Ellen Greenberg. For 13 years, Dr. Marlon Osborne stood by his amended ruling that Ellen Greenberg had killed herself. Then, in February 2025, something extraordinary happened. As part of a settlement in the Greenberg family's lawsuit, Dr. Osborne filed a sworn statement that sent shockwaves through the true crime community after reviewing additional information that had come to light over the years. Osborne stated it was now his professional opinion that Ellen's manner of death should be designated as something other than suicide. Following Osborne's stunning reversal, the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office agreed to re-examine the case as part of the settlement, but in October 2025, those hopes were dashed. Philadelphia's chief medical examiner issued a comprehensive review of the case, and the official ruling remained the same: suicide. But the questions have only multiplied. How does a person stab themselves 10 times in the back of the head and neck? How does someone penetrate their own spinal cord with enough force to sever it? Why were there 11 bruises in various stages of healing on Ellen's body? If Ellen was suicidal, why did she fill her gas tank for the coming days? Why was she planning meals, looking at wedding websites, and texting friends normally? Somewhere in Philadelphia, someone knows what really happened in apartment 603 on January 26, 2011. Someone knows why a vibrant 27-year-old teacher with her whole life ahead of her ended up on a kitchen floor with 20 stab wounds and a knife in her heart. Until that truth comes to light, Ellen Greenberg's death will remain what it has always been: a mystery that defies explanation, a ruling that defies logic, and a tragedy that demands answers. A property surrounded by security cameras, a driveway sensor that chimed with every approach, 4 German shepherds stationed like sentries around the perimeter, multiple firearms within arm's reach of both adults who lived there. This was a home designed to keep danger out, a fortress in the Ohio countryside, built layer by layer by a man who believed in self-reliance and preparation. And yet, inside that bedroom, a man lay motionless, a point-blank wound to the back of his head. His wife on the phone with 911, screaming for help, her voice cracking with desperation as she tried to explain what had happened. The cameras had recorded nothing. The dogs hadn't barked. The sensors hadn't triggered. A revolver sat on the kitchen floor, 1 round fired, the chamber warm. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. No evidence that anyone had come or gone in the night. If no one had broken in, then how did this happen? And if someone did break in, how did they manage to bypass everything without leaving a single trace? For investigators arriving at the scene that morning, these questions would become an obsession that consumed years of their careers. Because in the investigation that followed, the answer they found wasn't one anyone wanted to believe. The truth, as they came to see it, was darker and more disturbing than any intruder theory could ever be. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Jeremy Scott Simcoe came into the world on July 7, 1973, in Lorain, Ohio, a small city on the shores of Lake Erie where blue-collar values ran deep and neighbors still knew each other by name. The town had a working-class heartbeat, shaped by steel mills and shipyards, by men who came home tired and women who held families together through difficult times. He grew up in Sheffield Township, surrounded by dense woodlands and the kind of silence that makes you notice every rustling leaf. From an early age, Jeremy was drawn to the outdoors. While other kids spent summers glued to television screens, he was out exploring, climbing, learning to read the natural world around him. At Clearview High School, he found his competitive outlet on the wrestling mat. He wrestled varsity at the 135-pound weight class. Wrestling taught him discipline and how to push through exhaustion when every muscle screamed to quit. Those who knew him then remember a young man with intensity in his eyes, competitive, focused, unwilling to settle for second place. After graduating in 1991, Jeremy enrolled at Hocking Technical College in Nelsonville, where he studied arboriculture, the cultivation and management of trees. It was a path that combined his love of nature with practical skills. He started working for established companies, Edwards Tree Service first, then Davy Tree Service. These jobs were his education beyond the classroom. He studied the business from every angle, how things were run, what worked, and what didn't. In 1997, at just 24 years old, he founded Simcoe Tree Service. Building a business from nothing is never easy. But Jeremy attacked it with the same determination he'd brought to the wrestling mat. He was meticulous about doing things right, every cut precise, every cleanup thorough. He would climb trees that made other arborists nervous, moving through branches 60 feet above the ground with artistic confidence. Within a few years, Simcoe Tree Service had built a reputation as one of the premier operations in Lorain County. The business that had started with one man and a chainsaw grew into something substantial: trucks, equipment, employees, an expanding client list. But there were two sides to this coin. On job sites, Jeremy could be loud, strict, demanding. He expected perfection from his crews and didn't soften his criticism when they fell short. Some described him as a hothead, quick to frustration, unafraid of confrontation. His high standards made sense in dangerous work, but they also made enemies. Not everyone appreciated his management style. Away from work, a different Jeremy emerged. Friends and family described him as an avid naturalist who could spend hours identifying plants, tracking animals, simply being present in the wilderness. He loved campfires and cooking outdoors. He was a natural teacher, patient in ways that surprised people who knew his workplace reputation. He invested heavily in his nieces and nephews. He taught them to swim, to hunt safely, to drive on back roads. He passed down the practical knowledge that had shaped his own childhood. His family was close-knit. His mother, Rose Mager, his father, Robert J. Simcoe, his sisters, Melanie and Hillary, his paternal grandmother, Mary Simcoe. His in-laws, Judy and Rolando Maldonado, had welcomed him into their family when he married their daughter. That daughter was Julene. Jeremy and Julene had built something together beyond just a marriage. They were business partners as well as spouses, running Simcoe Tree Service side by side. She handled the administrative work, scheduling, billing, paperwork. He handled the physical work, climbing, cutting, the skilled labor that paid the bills. People who knew them often described them as best friends. They took long hikes together with their 4 German shepherds, the dogs that would later become central to understanding what happened. The Simcoe property on North Ridge Road in Brownhelm Township wasn't just a home, it was a compound. A gate blocked the driveway entrance. Even if someone got through, a driveway sensor would trigger a loud tone inside the house. The home had door sensors on every first-floor entrance. Open any door, and 3 rapid beeps would sound throughout the house. A speaker near the 3rd-floor loft ensured that even someone sleeping upstairs would hear the alert. Security cameras covered the front and back, with views of the driveway and barn. The footage was always recording. And then there were the dogs. 4 German shepherds, large, alert, and described by visitors as vicious-looking. At night, they were chained around the perimeter, positioned to detect anyone approaching. Living alarms with teeth. Inside, firearms were never far away. Both Jeremy and Julene had concealed carry permits. A 9mm was kept in the bedroom. A .357 Magnum often sat in a holster inside a first-floor china cabinet. Jeremy lived in a rural area where police response times could stretch long. He'd built his security system piece by piece, creating layers of protection that would warn him of any threat long before it reached his bedroom. He had prepared for every possible scenario. Every scenario except one. Tuesday, November 17, 2009. According to later accounts, it was an ordinary day at the Simcoe household. Julene spent part of the afternoon canning pumpkins. The couple watched television in the evening. Nothing remarkable. Around 10 p.m., Jeremy went outside to secure the dogs for the night. The security cameras recorded this, the last normal footage they would capture. When he came back inside, the kitchen door was locked. The security system was active. The cameras were rolling. Jeremy went to bed in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. Julene would later say she didn't join him there. She told investigators she went to the 3rd-floor loft to sleep on the couch. Her explanations varied. It was too hot. Jeremy had pushed her out of bed. His snoring was unbearable. The explanations changed depending on when she was asked. This inconsistency would later become a focus of investigation, but everyone agreed. In the hours that followed, the cameras recorded nothing unusual. The driveway sensor remained silent. The door sensors didn't chime. The 4 German shepherds didn't bark. The fortress held its breath. Until it didn't. At approximately 6 a.m. on Wednesday, November 18, 2009, a gunshot rang out inside the Simcoe home. Jeremy Simcoe was shot in the back of the head at point-blank range while lying in his bed. The barrel of the weapon had been so close to his skull that investigators would later describe it as a near-contact wound. He likely never knew what was happening. He never had a chance to fight back, to reach for the 9mm beside his bed, to use any of the skills or preparation that had defined his approach to life. He was killed in his sleep, in his own bed, in the fortress he had built to protect himself. Minutes later, Julene Simcoe called 911. Her voice was frantic, desperate, the kind of raw panic that makes dispatchers lean forward and type faster. She told the operator that someone had broken in, that her husband had been shot, that she needed help immediately. She stayed on the line following instructions, attempting CPR on a man who was already beyond saving. When officers arrived, they found Julene still on the phone, still talking to dispatchers. She explained what had happened, or what she said had happened. She had been sleeping on the third-floor loft couch when she heard a loud noise. At first, she thought it might be Jeremy firing at an animal from the bedroom window, something he'd done before when wildlife threatened their property or dogs. But something felt wrong. She went downstairs to check on him. In the darkness, she felt blood. And then she heard another noise somewhere else in the house. Footsteps, maybe, or a door. She grabbed the 9mm from the bedroom, using the glow from an alarm clock to disengage the safety, and fired 2 shots into the hallway. Then she found Jeremy's phone and called 911. A .357 Magnum revolver lay on the kitchen floor. 1 round had been fired. The 2 hallway shots had come from the bedroom 9mm that Julene claimed to have fired. But here's where the case took its first strange turn. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere. The doors and windows were locked, all except the kitchen door, which officers found standing open when they arrived. The screen door was closed, but unlocked. The security cameras had recorded nothing after Jeremy secured the dogs at 10 p.m. No approaching vehicle. No figure moving through the darkness. No shadow, no silhouette, nothing at all. The driveway sensor hadn't triggered. The dogs hadn't barked. 4 German shepherds, positioned specifically to alert their owners to intruders, had remained silent throughout whatever happened in that house. Officers searching the property found no evidence that anyone had entered from outside. No footprints leading to the house, at least none that could be attributed to a stranger. No DNA from an unknown source. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed beyond what the crime itself had caused. If a killer had broken in, they had done so without leaving a single trace. They had bypassed a locked gate, a driveway sensor, 4 aggressive dogs, multiple cameras, and locked doors. They had navigated a dark, unfamiliar house, found and retrieved a weapon from a china cabinet, located the bedroom, shot a sleeping man from inches away while his armed wife was somewhere unknown in the building, placed the gun carefully on the kitchen floor without dropping it or leaving marks, and disappeared into the night. All without waking anyone. All without the dogs making a sound. Investigators looked at this scenario and struggled to believe it could be true. But if not an intruder, then who? As investigators dug deeper into the evidence, small inconsistencies began to surface like cracks in a foundation. There was the matter of Julene's changing explanations for why she slept on the third-floor couch instead of in bed with her husband. Temperature, snoring, being pushed out, each version slightly different from the last, none of them quite fitting together into a coherent picture. There was the .357 Magnum on the kitchen floor. Officers noted that the gun showed no impact marks, no dents or scratches that would suggest it had been dropped by someone fleeing in panic. It looked, to their trained eyes, like it had been placed there deliberately, carefully set down rather than abandoned in haste. The china cabinet where the gun was normally stored was found slightly ajar, the empty holster visible inside like an accusation. And then there was what happened at the hospital. A nurse who was present when Julene arrived would later testify about something that stopped her cold. According to the nurse, Julene initially said, "I shot my husband." Then, Almost immediately, she corrected herself. Someone shot my husband. A slip of the tongue? Trauma-induced confusion? The kind of mistake anyone might make in the worst moments of their life? Or something more revealing, a truth that slipped out before the careful story could be maintained? Investigators also examined the couple's financial situation, looking for any pressure that might constitute motive. They learned that Jeremy and Julene had been trying to secure a bank loan to purchase adjacent land, an expansion of their property that would have required significant capital. The loan had recently been denied. Julene had mentioned moving the 9mm from its usual spot because of an appraisal related to the loan application. But when investigators contacted the bank, representatives said no appraisal had been scheduled. Another inconsistency. Another detail that didn't quite add up. And there was one more digital breadcrumb that caught investigators' attention. On the evening before Jeremy's death, just hours before the shooting, someone had accessed an online obituary for Julene's father. When asked about this, Julene denied doing it and couldn't explain why anyone in the household would have visited that page on that particular night. A strange coincidence? Or something more deliberate? A moment of reflection before irreversible action? None of these details proved anything on their own, but together, they painted a picture that made investigators deeply uncomfortable with the intruder narrative. The investigation would span years, becoming an obsession for detectives who couldn't let the case go. Initially, they followed every possible lead with open minds. A neighbor had reported seeing an unusual person walking near a church in the days before the shooting. Jeremy had apparently noticed this too. Someone had texted him about it because he was known as a sort of neighborhood watchman, always alert to anything out of place in the community. Another tip pointed to a neighbor identified in court records only as JB. Investigators interviewed him multiple times over the years, examined his possible connection to the case, tracked his movements, scrutinized his alibi. Eventually, they excluded him as a suspect. He died before the case ever went to trial, taking whatever knowledge he might have had with him. There were rumors of a drug deal gone wrong, the kind of speculation that follows any unexplained death in rural America, where people search for explanations that make sense of senseless violence. Investigators looked into it thoroughly and found nothing substantive. No evidence of drug involvement, no suspicious contacts, no financial trails suggesting illicit activity. But even as alternative theories fizzled one by one, the circumstantial evidence against Julene continued to accumulate like snow in winter. Forensic experts examined the bullet jacket fragments recovered from the bedroom. The analysis was consistent with the rounds having been fired from the .357 Magnum found on the kitchen floor. The bullet itself was never recovered. It had fragmented upon impact with Jeremy's skull, but the weapon analysis pointed strongly to that specific gun as the murder weapon. The gun showed no conclusive biological evidence tying it to the shooter. No fingerprints that could be definitively matched. No DNA under the grip. But it also showed nothing tying it to any mysterious intruder. No foreign DNA. No evidence of anyone else's presence. The black gloves found outside the house contained DNA from both Jeremy and Julene, consistent with gloves that either of them might have worn while working outside, not proof of any intruder. Footprints in the nearby woods had no identifying characteristics that could help or hurt either theory. The camera footage showed nothing. The 4 alert German shepherds had made no sound during the critical window when Jeremy was killed. Yet when police arrived with sirens and lights, dash cam footage confirmed the dogs barked immediately and aggressively, exactly as guard dogs should. They reacted to strangers. They just hadn't reacted to anyone that night. In 2013, investigators interviewed Julene again. pressing her on the inconsistencies in her story. 4 years had passed since Jeremy's death, but the case remained open, unsolved, haunting everyone who had worked on it. And in October 2014, nearly 5 years after that November morning, a Lorain County grand jury returned an indictment. Julene Simcoe was charged with murder in the death of her husband. She turned herself in and was released on a $500,000 bond, returning home to wait for the trial that would determine the rest of her life. The case went to trial in September 2017, 8 years after Jeremy Simcoe died in his bed. Julene made an unusual decision. She waived her right to a jury trial, opting instead for a bench trial. This meant that Judge Mark Betleski alone would weigh the evidence and determine her guilt or innocence. No 12 citizens deliberating. No unanimous verdict required. Just one man, trained in law, deciding whether the state had proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense called no witnesses. Their entire strategy rested on challenging the prosecution's case, arguing that circumstantial evidence, no matter how suggestive, wasn't enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no murder weapon conclusively tied to Julene, no confession, no eyewitness who saw her pull the trigger, just a web of suspicious circumstances and an alternative scenario that seemed implausible but couldn't be completely disproven. The prosecution laid out their theory methodically, building their case brick by brick. An unknown intruder, they argued, would have had to accomplish something virtually impossible. This hypothetical killer would have had to bypass the locked gate, avoid triggering the driveway sensor, pass 4 German shepherds without a single bark, enter through a door without forcing it, meaning either picking a lock or having a key, navigate an unfamiliar house in complete darkness, find and retrieve a weapon from a china cabinet without knowing it was there, locate the master bedroom, execute a sleeping man at point-blank range while his armed wife was somewhere unknown in the building, possibly awake, possibly armed, certainly dangerous if discovered. Then this intruder would have had to place the gun carefully on the kitchen floor rather than dropping it in flight. Exit the house, escape the property. Leave no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints, no camera footage, no physical evidence of any kind. And this intruder would have done all of this without stealing anything. Not the other guns, not any cash, not any valuables, nothing. The alternative explanation, prosecutors argued, required far fewer leaps of logic. On October 20, 2017, Judge Betleski delivered his verdict: guilty. In his ruling, the judge acknowledged something unusual. The prosecution hadn't sufficiently proven motive. Why would Julene kill her husband? The financial stress theory was incomplete. Denied loans create frustration, not typically murder. The marriage dynamics were open to interpretation. Investigators had found certain intimate materials in the home that suggested an unconventional relationship dynamic, but Julene insisted everything was consensual and nothing proved otherwise. The why remained murky, even at the end of the trial. But motive, Judge Betleski noted, isn't a required element for conviction in Ohio. Prosecutors don't have to prove why someone committed murder, only that they did commit it, beyond a reasonable doubt. Looking at the universe of possible explanations, a random stranger, a hired assassin, or the spouse sleeping one floor away, the judge concluded that only one scenario made logical sense given all the evidence. On October 27, 2017, Julene Simcoe was sentenced to 28 years to life in prison for the murder of her husband. She appealed, arguing that the evidence was insufficient to support the conviction. Her attorneys maintained that reasonable doubt existed, that the intruder theory, however unlikely, couldn't be completely eliminated. In April 2021, The Ohio Ninth District Court of Appeals affirmed the verdict. The justices found no reversible error. The conviction stands. Today, if you drive along Northridge Road in Brownhelm Township, you might pass the property without a second glance. Just another rural home among many. Trees that someone else tends now. A driveway that no longer leads to a fortress. The ordinary architecture of what was once an extraordinary life. But for those who knew Jeremy Simcoe, the loss still reverberates through the years like ripples on still water. His family remembers a man who taught his nieces and nephews to swim in summer lakes, to hunt responsibly in autumn woods, to drive carefully on backcountry roads, who could identify trees at a glance and climb them with the confidence of someone born for that specific purpose, who built a business from nothing through sheer will and meticulous attention to detail. Jeremy Simcoe had prepared for every possible danger, but sometimes the threat doesn't come from outside the walls. Sometimes the person we trust most completely is the one we should have feared. And sometimes the fortresses we build aren't meant to protect us from the world. They're meant to hide what happens within. If this case resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who appreciates true crime that respects both the facts and the lives behind them. It's through your support that we can continue telling these stories, not for sensationalism, but for understanding. Because remembering the people behind the cases, honoring who they were before tragedy found them, is how we keep their memory alive.